Good evening. Call the meeting to order at 6:03 p.m. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item of which is not on the agenda, I want to send out a big thank you to Mr. Miller for his years of service to the town. We wish him the best. I know that he's going to stay active in the town, which we are very happy about. So, Mr. Miller, if you're listening, thank you very much, and we all applaud you. Thank you. Secondly, we would like to welcome to the Board of Selectmen Mr. Randy Becker, who's joining the board this evening. We look forward to working with you. Looking forward to a very short 3 years. So thank you and welcome. First item on the agenda is a nuisance dog hearing. I will read the dog hearing protocol as follows. Called to order pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 140, Section 157. The Board of Selectmen is conducting a dog hearing as a result of a written report by the Webster Animal Control regarding several nuisance incidences involving a dog owned by Alan Savades. The purpose of this hearing is to determine what, if any, action should be taken by the Board of Selectmen involving his dog. Before starting the hearing, well, that's parts for me, I beg your pardon. The rules of the hearing: all persons who wish to speak must sign in. All those wishing to speak must be sworn in by the chairman. Each party will have 5 minutes to speak. Michelle LaFleche, Animal Control Officer, will be heard first. Secondary speakers will receive 3 minutes each. If a speaker feels he may need more time to speak, he may ask the chairman to grant that additional time. The board may grant or deny the request for additional time. The extra time will be granted in 5 or 3 minute segments. During the testimony period, the Board of Selectmen may ask questions at the end of each speaker's testimony. At no time during the hearing will outbursts or interruptions from the members of the audience be allowed. I'll ask Michelle LaFleche to please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, if I could briefly, so our first introduction to this matter was a written complaint from, I believe, 2 neighbors. Is that right, Courtney? 2 neighbors of Mr. Savades? 2 separate neighbors sent us correspondence. Is this the complaint?
That was the last dog hearing. This one was.
Is this the same one or a different one? I thought it was the same one.
Oh,
my apologies.
You're thinking of Joe George.
All right, thank you. Sorry, my bad, Mr. Chairman. So the owner of the dog, I believe, is not here. Is Mr. Savades here? No? So I would be very candid, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Savades has introduced quite a few complex relationships in the neighborhood within which he resides, and I think it reflects poorly that he did not show for the hearing. He had confirmed, I think yesterday or sometime this week, Courtney, that he would be here. So I think we should move forward and take the testimony of the dog officer as to the complaints that she has received and what she's witnessed in the neighborhood, please.
Okay.
Right. Michelle, will you please stand to be sworn in?
Yes.
Please raise your right hand. I swear that the testimony I am about to give is the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
I swear the whole testimony I'm about to give is the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Okay, we kind of have developed a relationship with this individual for his dog being loose numerous times. He's been cited twice, and I apologize because my printer isn't working, so I didn't print out my report, but I think you might have a copy of it there. Both times that he was cited, he did not pay the fines. It went through the court system, through the magistrate. He was found responsible for the citations, for having his dog off leash, for not presenting proof of rabies, and for not presenting a license to the town. He got charged in April of this year for another citation, which I just got back yesterday, and it has to go through the court system because, again, he did not pay. He claims this is a service animal, and the normal rules and regulations in the town and anywhere else do not apply to him and his dog. So if his dog wants to roam loose, he can allow his dog to roam loose. And he is not cooperative at all. So that's why we're here today.
Are there any questions from the, yes, Mr. McCullough?
Well, go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Are
I
there
want
any
to address
questions
the
from the board
service
at this
animal
point?
issue.
Through the chair, I have a question for the animal control officer. Is the dog in question actually dangerous or just roaming freely throughout the neighborhood?
It's roaming free throughout the neighborhood, but the neighbors have expressed that the dog has growled at them. I don't know, I personally have not, he had 2 dogs. One dog had passed away, and now he has another dog. So I honestly can't remember, because I don't know when that dog passed, the time frame. I'm not sure which dog it was that actually had growled at the resident.
So it says the dog is a German Shepherd. Has it shown any aggression towards you in your dealings with it?
Every time we go to get it, he gets it home, he puts it in the house, and we're not able to even look at it. He won't even let us see the dog.
Thank you.
Has the dog ever been licensed, as far as we know, through the clerk's office?
As far as we know, no. We had it checked out yesterday, and there was no record.
Yes.
Through the chair, has the gentleman produced any documentation to back up his claim that the dog is in fact a service animal?
Well, we can't legally ask him that.
Okay.
We can only ask him what tasks the dog performs for him. But he won't provide any documentation as to anything anyways, even if it was allowed. So he's totally uncooperative.
I'm certainly not an expert on the service dog regulations, but from reading them, it seems to me that the break, if you will, from standing rules are access to things like restaurants and retail establishments. It would not be from a leash law. It would not be from following other normal regulations. It's that you're not allowed to be discriminated against because you have a need to have this service animal with you, and that may include going to a restaurant or some other retail establishment. So I'm not sure, in Mr. Saviti's mind, how he gets to absolve himself from normal requirements of a leash law.
Right, and I spoke to Robert Diaz from the Commonwealth of Mass today, who's an expert on service dogs and companion animals, and the laws apply. He's not allowed to, he has to license the dog through the town, he has to abide by the bylaws according to what we have regarding dogs in the town, and he just does not believe that he has to do that.
Well, and furthermore, I would think too, if he hasn't had a proof of an active rabies vaccination, that does pose a public safety hazard, because who knows what the medical condition of the dog could be if it runs around and bites somebody.
I did see his van parked at the Animal Hospital of Webster, so I did call, and after some, I spelled his name wrong for them, and that was my fault, but they finally found out who he was, and the dog is actively vaccinated till December 3rd of this year. It was a 1-year rabies, and I believe it was given probably in December, the last time after we were there and he received his second citation. But I had to track down the info. He would not provide that to me. I just happened to see the van there and took a chance in calling.
So through the chair, so what's the next step? If you decide not to come to a hearing, does that just continue? You set a hearing, and then if the gentleman doesn't show up again, so what happens?
I would think we're going to have to send him some type of certified mail and take it to its extreme. I don't think we'd want to push this button immediately, but I guess take it to its extreme. He could be subpoenaed and have to explain what's happening. Given the history of this gentleman, I think we probably have to take a pretty firm stance on what the sanctions would be moving forward. So we can certainly discuss this with town council and come up with a path moving forward, but he's got a long history of not being cooperative. When was, if I could, Mr. Chairman, Michelle, you may have said this, I apologize if I missed it. So Has there been an instance since April 3rd when you had a complaint? Have you seen the animal roaming free or received another complaint since
No.
April 3rd? Okay.
And Courtney, did we call him, or was there a letter sent?
A
or-
certified return receipt letter was sent out. They did not pick that up. That generated me to get the contact information for him. From the Board of Health, they had it. And I did call and speak with the girlfriend, and she did say she'd be here.
So through the chair, my next question, Michelle, is what type of standing authority would the town have say this dog gets loose again, as far as a length that we would be able to legally impound the dog and essentially maybe give him a mini prison sentence to wake up the owner, in a sense?
We legally could take the dog for not being licensed
Okay.
in our possession, but I think trying to get the dog, if it's on his property,
Well, my thoughts are, at least if it breaks the leash law again and it's in public space, hopefully
Yeah.
that would be easy for us to acquire the dog and then hold him until the dog is licensed and some action on his part is taking place.
yeah, it's getting the dog when it's loose, because it's such a, normally in the neighbor's yard, and he knows when they're gonna call, so he calls the dog home, we get there, the dog's in the house.
Gotcha.
That's it. We haven't lucked out yet where we're close enough by just to get it. And I'm not sure we would be able to, but.
So what would be your recommendation at this point?
My recommendation would be for the guy to fence in his yard. If he wants his dog to roam free and he doesn't want to restrain it, then let the dog, then require him to fence in his yard or a portion of his yard where the dog can run around.
And license the dog?
Oh, absolutely.
The yard is of a reasonable size to be fenced.
I believe so, yeah.
And what would the time frame suggestion be? License the dog, obviously effective 5 days?
Immediately.
Would you say 5 days?
Yeah, I would give him 5 days.
And what about
He
the,
knows he's, this, this
has
has been going
ongoing.
on.
What about fencing the yard?
I'm not sure how long that would take to, I mean, I'm sure he'd have to call and get some quotes, and then it would depend on the contractor putting the fence up, and then if he's even gonna do it. Maybe 60 days is reasonable? I don't know. You feel that's reasonable?
Yeah.
I would, this has been such an ongoing thing. Would we want to give it 2 months? What's the pleasure of the board? What is the board's situation?
I'd have to say, if, I'm not sure what his financial condition is, so you might want to be cautious towards that. So maybe I would agree with giving 60 days would be a reasonable time frame for him to come up with a plan to get a fence, get bids for a contractor. If there is a financial hardship, he might have to demonstrate that to us on why he wouldn't be able to.
So my opinion is that with the last hearing we had, we did have at least 1 or 2 pretty violent dogs from what I gathered. And the fencing requirement for those dogs and that owner seemed to fit because of his involvement. This owner, I feel he just wants to let the dog out and just isn't playing by the rules. The way I see it is, I think we need to get the licensing component figured out. Obviously, all dogs have to be licensed. I don't think there should be really any leeway. I think that should just be immediate because it's not even much money. The fencing thing, obviously, that could provide a financial hardship. I think if we see this dog around and we could get a hold of it, we impound the dog until he complies with keeping the dog inside, or we're going to take firmer action thereon. I think without having the owner here to just say we're going to mandate you to get a fence without hearing his side of the story, I just kind of want to see us do our due diligence.
I think that makes sense. I think what we could do is continue it, send him certified mail and regular mail and a constable, and explain that action will be taken at the, I don't know what the next scheduled meeting is, I think it's the 18th. The action will be taken on the 18th, up to including, I would put in the letter, up to including having the dog put down under the provisions of the law. And I know that sounds extreme, but that's the provisions of the law, and it's in his best interest to show and discuss what remedies he's gonna put in place to make sure that the animal's properly cared for and on a leash or contained within a yard.
Well, I feel at the very least, I mean, it obviously sounds like he wants the dog and cares for it. If he can call it back to the yard, he has some sort of relationship with it. It's not some stray that he keeps at his house. If we get a chance where we can impound this dog and it goes to doggy jail, I'm thinking he's eventually gonna want the dog back and will comply with our wishes, hopefully.
I think that's essentially if you find it. If you find it roaming, we pick it up. I'm not
Yeah.
sure that we can,
We've been
I don't know
trying,
if we
we
can-
we
Are the
boogie over
neighbors-
there.
I don't think
Are
we
the
can
neighbors
issue a
act-
sentence and put him in.
Are the neighbors friendly to the dog? Maybe they could actually lower and hold
No,
him
the
to
neighbors
the-
don't like the dog.
No, okay. I didn't know maybe if there was one around that
No.
they would tolerate. It's okay.
They're the reason why we're here, because they're very
Yeah.
concerned about the dog and
Okay.
concerned about him as an individual as well.
So
And
it's multiple neighbors too, not just one or two? It's like
No, there's
one or
several
two.
neighbors,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
No, and again, through the chair, I'm not sure of the definition of a nuisance dog as opposed to a dangerous dog. Have we
Right.
reached the point yet where this is deemed a dangerous dog?
Nuisance.
It's a nuisance
It's a
dog?
nuisance.
Because there are obviously, higher issues when you have a dangerous dog.
Right.
Any other questions for Michelle? Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any others to whom wish to speak in regards to the hearing, the dog hearing? All speakers have had the opportunity to speak, therefore the hearing is now closed. Thank you all for participating in this hearing.
You want to continue the hearing, Mr. Chairman? Not close it, but continue to May 18th?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, you guys want to continue?
So-
Make a
Are
motion to
we-
continue it?
I'm assuming that we're gonna reach out to a constable or more certified mail to track this individual down. Sure, did you make a motion?
No, I'll entertain a motion.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to continue the hearing until the 18th?
Second,
Is there a second?
yes. Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Courtney, poll the board.
Selectman Becker?
Yes.
Selectman Starzak?
Yes.
Selectman Julda?
Yes.
Selectman Board?
Yes. Do you want to give it
Do you want
Yeah.
to? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
At this point, we're going to take a 5-minute recess and then come back in, within 5 minutes as a couple of us need to run downstairs real quick for the career event that's going on, and then we'll come back in at 25 after 6. Is that good? We are back. Thank you for indulging us to spend a few moments downstairs with Career Day. As we have held public hearings on the future potential 2.5 override, the board had chose this evening to make a decision. I now want to turn it over to Mr. McAuliffe and Mrs. Regis to offer some opinions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've had the opportunity to serve in this capacity in different communities for 19 years. This is the first time that I've had the need to seriously push and consider the importance of an override of the tax levy, to override our Proposition 2.5 formula. So this is a first. The 6 years I've had the honor to serve Webster, we have been close on a couple of occasions, particularly I think last year and possibly the year before. We had a lot of serious dialogue with the school committee and the school department about whether or not somewhat just kicking the can down the road was going to continue to work if we were going to meet the goals of our community. And what we feel very strongly is a much better trajectory that Webster is on than it was at one point in its history. So we're very close to doing this last year. Interestingly, in the state of Massachusetts, there's 351 cities and towns. All but 51 have at least attempted an override. So Webster is one of 51 communities out of 351 that have never attempted an override, which had surprised me. So 86% of the communities in Massachusetts have attempted it. It's really quite interesting to me as someone that still loves what I do and eats, sleeps, and breathes this type of local government work. It's become like a dirty word, and that really is a shame. It's even more of interest to me that communities that are considered affluent communities used to pass them literally every year, or every other year, every third year. There are communities that the dialogue is, how much is the override this year? So it's interesting that those communities that have the ability to pay don't view it as a massive failure like some other communities want to taint this process, that this is somehow a failure. So when Proposition 2.5 was enacted in 1981, there was a mechanism to say if you had something unusual and your community supported it through a purely democratic process of a ballot vote and a town meeting appropriation process, then you could override the formula which allows for a 2.5% increase of the levy limit. Our financial team takes a lot of pride in the 7 budgets that we've worked on in my time here, that we have avoided that. It is most frustrating for me, in light of some personal circumstances, that this would be the year that we just don't think we can keep all of the plates spinning on the broom handles without something going wrong. We don't think this is a year that we can pull it together unless there's going to be a severe reduction in services. There are many of those that think somehow that's a success story, which boggles my mind, that somehow shutting down limited services that this community has is a great success. That if we were going to be proactive and professional and timely, we would simply lay a bunch of people off. I can tell you as someone who's been here a lot of hours, a lot of people take pride in serving their community. A lot of people in this building, police officers, firefighters, highway, water, sewer, library, council on aging, school department, we take a lot of pride in doing what we do for this community. We're here to serve, we serve at the pleasure of the community, and we enjoy that. And we want to see this town continue to prosper. And it doesn't work under Prop 2.5 without drastically increasing state aid. Anyone that wants to say differently, I'd love to have that discussion with them. Proposition 2.5 is something I actually believe in. I actually believe in it. But it does not work without increasing state aid. It does not work when your fixed costs are hundreds of thousands of dollars higher than your Proposition 2.5 levy limit increase. Our increase is around $480,000. Just health insurance and retirement pensions, which is a formula, it's not a flexible amount, veterans benefits, and things like school transportation, just a few items. That's not listing everything, including a Bay Path vocational regional school assessment. Those items grossly outstrip that number. So then you're completely beholden upon state aid. Now this year we are getting an increase, thankfully. But it's not sufficient to continue to provide the type of services that we think Webster needs. So the years of kicking the can down the road, I think, unfortunately, that's not going to suffice any longer. We've opened up a new police station we're very proud of. The school department's in the process of opening up a beautiful elementary school. You know, with that comes some additional maintenance costs, some additional utility costs. That's a reality. So, as we present to the board this evening, Mr. Chairman, as we did a week ago Monday, you know, the numbers are the numbers. I would love to see a discussion that focuses on what the numbers are. Anyone that takes the time to go out to dinner or go shopping knows that money doesn't go too far in this day and age, and we respect that gets pushed back to us as well, that money doesn't go very far, so how can you expect us to pay more? But the override range that we've looked at, a bare bones number that really doesn't even get us to a full capacity of staff for the general government side in the Park Ave Elementary School is close to really $800,000, $900,000. That's what that number is. For an average home in Webster, a $900,000 override is $126 for the year. $1 million override is $140 for the year. That's the year. $140 for the year. So we know in one lump, that's a lot of money. Spread out over 4 billing cycles, spread out over the 2 actual billing cycles, we think that's a reasonable request to have a community that has, you know, I think has growing pride, growing programs, improving school departments, improving neighborhoods. I think a $140 request, if your home is worth double that, if it's a $400,000 home, then it's $252 for $900,000. It's $280 for $1 million override. That's on a home worth $400,000. So, I mean, I know anyone that goes to a local grocery store and gets a cart full of groceries, if you have anything in there that's red meat or anything, you know, God forbid you need coffee, tinfoil, and red meat, because you're going to spend $250 with a cart full of groceries. So I'm not sure what we didn't present last Monday night that you would have questions on, Mr. Chairman, or anyone in the audience. But I think it's, you know, it's time that Webster joins what is 86% of Massachusetts and at least ask the taxpayers through the democratic process if we feel that this is something that you'd like to continue to improve the services here in Webster and continue to make the progress that the town's been making.
Thank you, Mr. McCullough. And the truth of the matter is that we are not the final say in this, as it does go to ballot, if I'm correct. So, Mrs. Regis, do you have anything to add?
I don't. I just, Mr. McCullough, if you just want to maybe discuss our meeting this morning with the school department and our decision that we came to, our recommendation to the board.
Thank you, Mrs. Regis. So we've worked very closely with the school department and the school leadership and the school committee as we've had. It's really been a pleasure to work with the leadership team that the school has always sent over as part of the budget process and the school committee. And through that process, including today, we developed what we think is a reasonable strategy and that we would seek the board put this forward to the voters, which is a two-pronged approach, if you would, Mr. Chairman. We're above just that minimum Band-Aid number. We would propose, again, 2 choices on the same ballot. One would be a request for $2 million of an override. Now, why would you ask for $2 million when we're talking about at least getting to $1 million? Communities that have been successful in this, I know the town of Arlington is one of them, where they have a 3-year or a 5-year override, and they don't levy the taxes to the max. Now, that's a lot more complicated than what happens in reality. You simply have an allowance to spend up to $2 million in additional levy capacity, but you would phase in that approach. So you would appropriate $1 million of that in the first year and then work towards keeping that capacity, but using some of it in the subsequent 2 years. So that would be one question that we're proposing, Mr. Chairman. The second question would be just the straight $1 million override on top of the levy limit.
So both pieces would appear on the ballot if we go through with this tonight.
This is considered a pyramid approach. So what happens is, if a voter is in favor of the $2 million override, again, spread out over 2 years, $1 million this year and $1 million
So essentially, there would be 3 blocks.
Two.
And wouldn't there be, or you would just ignore the 2?
A yes and a no, a yes and a no for both questions. And we can tell the residents that we're only going to use $1 million of that $2 million, capacity that you have granted to us. That will be readily apparent in the budget as presented, what we're recommending at the June 22nd town meeting. Town meeting is the appropriating body, the only body that can appropriate the money. So it's in their control. We recommend, we propose, but it's under the town meeting control. So they are in control in making sure that we are saying doing what we said we were going to do, and only levying $1 million of that $2 million this year, and then $1 million next year.
Yes.
Through the chair, could there be clarifying language on the ballot so that people wouldn't be confused that this is, oh, if I vote for 2 million and 1 million, I'm getting 3? Because that could be confusing, could be construed to be that way. Are we allowed to put, sorry, the sun's right there. Are we allowed to put clarifying language on the ballot, you know, to remind people that, no, this wouldn't be 3 million if you're voting for both?
I don't think we're allowed on the ballot, but I think we're allowed, I don't know if there's some way you have an informational table physically in the same location where people could have an information sheet.
Something like the state does when we have questions on the ballot. They send out a flyer saying, yes means this, no means this. We could do something like that, to make sure that people understand, and of course, ask the questions. But absolutely. If the board votes to go forward with this, as recommended on June 15th, we will start working immediately on, putting together information and having it readily available. And we're always available also for any questions.
Thank you.
Any questions from the board?
Maybe just one more. Has this been attempted, I think, John, you mentioned Arlington. Has it been attempted in other towns where the pyramid approach has been used?
I'm not sure what approach they've used, so I don't know if you.
This is one of the approaches that.
It's killing me.
Thank you. I
Thank
thought
you.
it was the new guy.
Yeah, that's the initiation.
That's
for
the
new
initiation for the
selectmen.
new guy.
This is one of the approaches that the Department of Revenue and Division of Local Services,
Okay.
you know, says that you can use it as a general purpose with one question, all or nothing, a pyramid approach, there's a menu approach. There are several different approaches. We just thought that this one was straightforward.
Mhm.
It is a little confusing with 2 million, 1 million, what am I voting for? We will do our best. We will make sure that we get that information.
When you think it's appropriate, Mr. Chairman, there's a few other things I just would like to share with the community, because I think it's part of how we got here, and it's
Sure.
kind of an observation
Well, I
about
was
some
going to
statewide.
call on Mr. Avlis. Would you like to share anything real quick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Malkus sends her regrets for not being here. As you know, she's home recovering from surgery, and I'm glad to report she's doing extremely well.
Great.
For the board's information, so we're very pleased to hear that at this time. The school department strongly endorses the plan that the town administrator and the town accountant have presented here tonight. We feel this two-prong approach serves our needs. We had laid out a series of budget scenarios, and frankly, the $2 million over 2 year was the top scenario, and the $1 million over 1 year was actually the second scenario. So that works out for the school department just fine. What it allows us to do the first year is to maintain services, to reconstruct our 3 new schools based on the grade reconfiguration, to deal with compliance, and to deal with some technology issues. The second year, with the additional override, were that to pass, would satisfy the needs that we have regarding technology, further assistance through special education and compliance, and the other issues that we are faced with on an annual basis. So those 2 would work for us just fine. We would certainly appreciate the wishes of the townspeople as to which option they were to choose, but we think that the way it is outlined would serve us very well. I can tell you that if the override does not pass, you know, we are prepared to deal with that as well, and would be, and have a budget prepared. We know that it would constitute some reductions in staffing. That's always a very difficult thing to do. We actually would be looking at reductions in the classrooms. We would be looking at reductions of elective courses at the high school. Those are not options that we're interested in preparing for, but would be, you know, should the Proposition 2.5 override not be approved. We agree with Mr. McAuliffe. We have lived with 2.5 now since 1981, 82. We know that 2.5 is not some magical number that appears and says, yes, you can live with a 2.5% override in your levy and be just fine. That's not the case. It was set to be a minimum that you could increase the levy automatically, and then it gave a mechanism for you to go to a town meeting, use the democratic process, and say, you know what, this community needs to, you know, at this time, extend beyond the 2.5 in order to maintain the services and level of education that we need. And this is a partnership. I mean, we don't come here advocating for the school department without advocating for the municipal side as well. It's very important for the school department to have good police, good fire, good rescue, good town highway maintenance for our roads and driveways. All those things are just as important to us as they are to the rest of the community, and we stress that. With that being said, I hope that the board will look favorably on the recommendation here tonight and know that the school department endorses it.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Evans from the board? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Fenimore, please come forward.
Good evening, gentlemen. Martin Fenimore, Chairman of the Webster Finance Committee. For 10 years, we've been in favor of an override. The Finance Board, past Finance Boards have been in favor of an override. It hasn't been presented to the present Finance Board, but I don't believe we would have any problems agreeing that the override is a necessity. I do have one question, though. Any monies that are spent has to go to the town meeting. What are the safeguards that we don't have a feeding frenzy on the town meeting floor once we pass, and if we pass an override for that money once that levy is lifted?
Mr. McCollum?
I think the most important part of explaining how the process would work for everyone is when you have a partnership like we've had in Webster between the schools and general government, so that, I mean, there's not likely to be a third party that would, you know, navigate through a town meeting process and sway a couple hundred people if it was against the wishes of the general government side and the school department. And I think we give a commitment to that phased-in approach. The law allows for an increase in the levy limit through the appropriation process at town meeting. So if there was a mechanism that we could disallow that, I think it would be great to do that. However, it is the town meeting. Town meeting retains the authority to levy where and how you want. So there's no mechanism to ensure there's not a feeding frenzy, to use your words, other than the same way we go through the process now. It's one person, one vote. People get up and make their case, and usually the wisdom of 150 people or 200 people is better than the wisdom of a few, and that's how the process works.
Is there a legal way that we can have a memorandum of understanding between the school and the town that the percentages, what percentages can go towards the town and what percentages can go towards the school?
I've never been a fan of that. I know there's years that I'm probably a couple of points, you know, or a couple of decimal points anyway, higher than them, and there's years that they're a couple of decimal points higher than us. For example, and it's on my list, Mr. Chairman, of things I just want to briefly mention, you know, we're working through a regional dispatch arrangement, so that's caused some short-term strain. It's going to be a very, very good decision for this community over time. But as we work through that, then I may have to sit down and look at my colleagues in the school department and say, listen, this is my year, I have to take a hit. One of the big hits this year is veterans benefits. It's up $120,000 in 1 year. $120,000. Now, everyone certainly applauds the purpose of that program. We still have to find the money under one small limited pie of revenue. So something else loses part of their slice. So given that it's a very dynamic process, I'm not a fan of just having a percentage. Their population changes from year to year. I know my first year here with the busing reductions the school department made, they took all of the aggravation, cut a bunch of bus routes, and that money went to the general government side of the ledger. So that would have been a year we would have regretted saying we're only allowed to capture a certain percentage, because the school was more than generous back in that cycle that we had gone through. So I think rational people sit down and work it out.
You're gonna be gone, Mr. McCullough, and I hope the next time.
Not that many people call me
is as
rational,
reasonable
Michael.
as you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've discussed the application, with the school department, and I'm very comfortable with Mr. Avalos and his team. And, you know, there may be some play in that and how the final allocation comes out with the additional levy capacity, but I will be here for more, for good or bad. And, I plan on this process being a very transparent process. I've been working on a budget which will, have an override scenario and a no override scenario, and, what the impact of each will be, so.
Is Mr. Finnemore still here?
I think you just marked it.
Okay. Please, I just want to ask him one more question.
Now that's-
He doesn't often get the floor, so when he does.
oh,
And you thought you were gonna get away.
I got a meeting at 7 o'clock.
That's why I called you back in. No, I'm kidding. Question, has Webster ever done a 2.5 override?
No,
Never.
and we have fought for one, the finance board has fought for one for 10 years there since that was retired. We have begged them to put one on the agenda. We feel that the first, second, and maybe even the third override attempt will fail. We have always felt that way. But we felt that we had to get it out there to the people. We had to let them know that the economy was caving, and we had to let them know that there are other sources of funding, and we have to reach out for them. So I'm glad that they finally saw the light, but I don't think it's going to pass. But at least we get it out there.
Thank you. Mr. McCollum.
So I promise I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman, and I want to mention a few things because I hope it just explains some of the background of maybe how we got here and how, what's happening in the world of municipal finance. I mean, first of all, in my time here, you will not find one article written that has said the sky is falling financially. And we've had some pretty difficult years behind the scenes, very difficult years. A lot of hand-wringing, a lot of give and take with all the different groups, but we've always made it work. So I hope this comes with some credibility when a finance committee, school department, board of selectmen, town accountant, town administrator will say, this is the time now, because we've made it work. We almost, interestingly, almost work to our detriment when it doesn't look as bad in the public, because we don't want to just push the panic button. We like to fix it. But the reality is we almost shoot ourselves in the foot when we aren't being a little more alarming, but we haven't done that because I've always felt our job is to make it work, and we've made it work. So for us to now say it is happening for a reason, because it's the truth, and we've essentially run out of steam to make it work within this structure of Prop 2.5. Just so people are aware, Webster has been at the levy limit for as long as anyone can remember. So, I mean, to put a number to it, it could be 25 years, longer than that.
I've been here 15 years, it's been that.
So at least 15 years, which means every single year, we're already under the gun. We already know we're gonna have to live under that cap. So I get a lot of questions about how come other communities make it work. A lot of communities aren't at their levy limit. So if they don't have the same constraint, they're not looking at the same layoff scenario, and they're not looking at the same fiscal challenges, all trying to come together at the same time. So it's helpful in my mind that the community knows that we've been at our levy limit for at least 15, probably longer years, and we've made it work each and every one of those years. We went through a major downsize 4 or 5 years ago. The school department lost 25 positions, and they haven't yet filled all of those, to my knowledge. So the school department is smaller than it was. Mrs. Regis and I were going through the general government side going back about 10 years. In most instances, town departments are at or below where they were 10 years ago. It's just the way the town has always tried to move forward with the most, I guess, meager way possible to not try to spend the community's money that we didn't have. One of the things that has kept us out of this situation for the last 5 years, when a lot of towns have hit the wall, is what we've done with health insurance. And the employees deserve a lot of credit because they have had health insurance changes more aggressive than any community that I'm aware of. Our changes had been 3 or 4 straight years, and then we had a 3-year agreement on what we would do with our health insurance. And the employees are no longer like people may want to think about the old 20-year-old model of what a municipal employee had for benefits. I mean, right now, people do have major deductibles and co-pays and a tiering system and higher emergency room costs and prescription drug programs that are much different than they used to be. So all of that has been in play for a long time. We have been able to level fund or actually reduce our health insurance appropriation for 5 years. This is a year now that we can't do that. I mean, the market is always difficult. Health insurance inflation on average is anywhere between 9 to 12%. So we've been very successful in managing a self-insured system for a number of years. At some point, the community is going to want to look to get away from that and not take on that risk. And part of this overall strategy of an override should look towards making that happen. I think in the next 3 years-ish, that you would want to move away from being a self-insured system and paying just a premium. You just get a bill and you write a check and you don't assume the risk as we do now. And that's going to be more expensive, but it's going to be much less risky. That's an important thing to note. The veterans benefit, I mentioned that we couldn't, what changed this year, that number being such an increase. The Regional Dispatch Center, which we're very proud of, we're seeking a third community. We've been very close to having a third community join us. In the meantime, those costs, I would say, are artificially high based upon the direction that we'll go in at some point, but that's a cost that we're carrying. And if I've said this too many times, I'll stop, but I did a very quick survey about 6 months ago of communities our size in Massachusetts, and I picked the 29 other closest communities population size between 15-ish thousand up to about 18,000 even. And of those 30, and it was 2012 or 2013 numbers, I don't recall, but Webster was not near the bottom for tax burden. Webster was the bottom. It was the lowest tax burden average bill in the state for a community our size. So those are the facts. So it always intrigues me when people tell me about the awful job we do with raising taxes when we were the lowest dollar amount of any community our size. Since that time, we've taken on big projects, and I think we're up to about 4 or 5 from the bottom. Although the debt service, we get a lot of questions about this, is already starting to come down because you start in a municipal project, you start at the very most expensive point in a municipal bond, and then it goes down every year. So I take great interest in that, and I hope we can share that with the community, that the sense that we're unfair with our tax burden does not ring true when you do the research. And just interestingly, and I think because the gentleman was a very strong mentor of mine, not that I'm as talented as he is, but Dan Morgado in Shrewsbury, the town manager, who's been there, I guess about 17 or 18 years, and is one of the most talented town managers, I think, in New England, and runs the town of Shrewsbury, which is about the most diversified tax base you could pray for. They had a sizable override request and a successful ballot initiative for an override last year. And to me, as a student of this business that eats, sleeps, and breathes this profession, I can assure you that is staggering. When the Shrewsburys of the world cannot get by without an override, reshuffles the deck, the old phrase of a paradigm shift. For me, that was a real learning moment to say, at some point, and to use Mr. Morgado's phrase, he's a succinct, to the point gentleman, the state's not going to come bail us out. So we better manage our own shop, And we can reduce the staff. Emotionally, it's very difficult. Mathematically, it's quite simple. Emotionally, awful. Mathematically, quite simple to just say, we're gonna lose public safety people, and this building is gonna lose 1 day a week, and you're gonna have less hours for a senior center and a library and a veteran's home. All of that mathematically is not that difficult. It's not a dialogue we wanna have and scare people and really ruin productivity if there's a way to make it a better community. So this is where we think the community needs to go, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
Through the chair, I'd actually like to raise another question, Mr. Avlis, if you wouldn't mind me putting you back in the hot seat. At the public hearing we had discussed looking at either a 5% or a 12%. I'm assuming that the numbers we have here before us, the 1 and 2, are possibly a derivative of that in some capacity. So going forward on your end, if we do this pyramid override and we're looking at a no, a 1, and a 2, what would be the difference on your end of lost services if the 1 passes instead of the $2 million override?
Well, that actually is a budget that we had prepared, and there are a loss of services that we would be providing that we included in our budget initially. There were several new positions that were involved in there. There were also some increases in technology. We were looking at a 3-year plan to implement one-to-one devices for our middle school and 10th and 9th and 10th graders. And we also need support people to be able to support that. We have a tremendous facility at Park Ave with now technology abounds, and with the infrastructure that's also in that building, it allows us to have that type of initiative in that building. But you need support if you're going to have that kind of instruction in all 3 of your schools, and that's part of the plan moving forward. So there are some instances where we wouldn't be able to implement all the technology or all of the staffing needed, but it would certainly save the core, and the core being the compliance that we have with special education, and to keep the instruction and the success rate moving that has been seen under the last 3 years under our new superintendent. Although our scores are nowhere near where we would like them to be and our success rate is not, we are seeing improvement. And in order to continue that, it is critical that we have that type of funding in our budget to keep moving forward. As you know, we are a level 3 district. We don't want to drop down to level 4. That is the worst case scenario, and with it comes a whole bunch of implications that nobody wants to face. We have a community very close to us that's a level 4 school district, and I think we're all aware of the issues in that district. We feel that we're not heading in that direction. We feel we're heading in the other direction, and we may not be, level 2. We may not make that step up anytime soon, but we are working towards it, and this budget would go a long way towards helping us achieve that goal.
So I think my biggest concern with the override process is if the $1 million override gets us going through the year, if we run out of steam in the next year or year thereafter versus we have the $2 million, which catches us a breath of wind for 3 to 4 years, because my biggest fear is if the 1 million passes and down the road we run out of steam and the voters are going to say, well, we just passed an override 3 years ago, government's not within its means, and blah, 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 and we end up in a sense taking a step backwards now with these new schools we have. It's like going and buying a new car but not being able to afford the tires on it, and to me that seems counterproductive. And I guess my question to you is just seeing where we lie with these 2 overrides to make sure we're not going to have, kids that are having to pay for sports. Why should they be punished for that? And, God forbid, letting go of teachers, which I think is just awful. So
I'm glad you mentioned paying for sports, because through all of this, we are very proud, and I think this community should be too, that they have always, from as far back as the first high school in 1860, I think, offered a free public education in this community. We don't charge for athletics. We don't charge for extracurricular activities. We don't charge for parking your car in the student parking lot, which many, if not all of our communities in our area do. We offer this as a service to our community and our kids because they deserve it. We also feel this is an extremely good time to strike while the iron is hot. You know, we're amongst other communities that are going through the same types of financial strains that we are. Obviously, we're not alone in all of this. This is happening, and you pick up the newspaper and you see it every single day. We have an opportunity to, I think, attract some of the students who have chosen and their families chosen to go to school in another school district. I think I've mentioned this before at our public hearing. We have approximately 130 Webster students attending other public schools. What a great opportunity for us to show those families who choose to send their children to another community, and by the way, take $5,000 of the community's money with them. So if you have an average tax bill at $2,700, $3,000, and you're sending your child to another school district, you're sending $5,000 with that child to that school district, which means you're not contributing at all to the welfare of this community. You're not contributing anything to fire, police, highway, schools. And by the way, if your neighbor is doing that at $5,000 a pop, then a good chunk of your money is not contributing either. This is a great time, I think, for us to send a message to the entire region of how we feel important education is in our community, and we're willing to make that investment right now to attract those kids back and to give the kids that we have here a quality education.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the board? Mr. Evans? Thanks. It's always been, I've spent the majority of my time in school, except for the time that I spent in a short amount of time in Catholic school out in Fitchburg. I attended Monty Tech. One of the things that got me through school, I was not a good student, but one of the major things that got me through school was sports. And in no way, shape, or form, even back then, in 1979 to 1983, my family did not have to pay a dime for me to take sports. I don't feel it's right. I don't feel now's the time for anyone to have to pay for sports. We've got, and I'm not going to bring him up here, but we've got a great athlete in the room, and he's a high school student. And I can tell you he can run faster than any one of us in this room. Am I right? I won't have you come up. But with that said, he's a great student. He loves his sports. He loves going to school. I don't have any kids in this school system. I never have, and I never will. But the truth of the matter is that we are here tonight to make the right decision for the town to move forward. And with that said, I will ask for a vote of the board.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think, as I had said earlier, my only concerns are I want to make sure that this pyramid override is the structure that we're looking to put forward to the voters. I think essentially what I'm getting at through to Mr. McAuliffe and Mrs. Regis is, do you feel confident that this structure will suffice the needs of the district versus the selectmen authorizing a straight $2 million override?
Well, I think a lot depends on what changes with the things that we've already discussed. I mean, it goes back to those fixed costs, that's reality. What happens in health insurance and pensions, and what's happening with things like veterans benefits, and the school department will, I don't want to put words in their mouth, I'm sure they're going to talk about their costs for things like special education and those items. It's certainly a great boost to our budget to say there's $1 million in money. There's $1 million in revenue now that we're allowed to maintain services and move forward. So with the healthy state economy and state aid being a big part of our budget, with that continuing, then I think that the $1 million is important. I think the idea of the $2 million override is it assures that you don't have to go back and ask, and it assures that that capacity is there. It won't be raised, but it would be an allowance. It would be excess levy capacity. Literally, we have excess ability to raise taxes and still be under our Prop 2.5 levy limit.
So can we see, as we mentioned before, having a informational handout at the ballot if this passes?
All of these activities are heavily governed by the Department of Revenue, and a lot of it are spelled out in the state law. So to the extent legally allowed, we will get as much information as we're entitled to present.
And I plan on having some type of informational meeting for municipal employees, elected officials, things like that, because we are restricted in information that we can put out there and things like that. I want to make sure that everyone understands what is allowed and what they can and cannot do and say. You know, Mr. McAuliffe has a phrase that he uses, and it's actually one of the ones he uses that I like. And
You waited this long to tell me there's at least one that you like?
you know, what do you want your community to look like? And he's right. And this gives the residents and taxpayers of our community a choice. You know, it's up to them if the board so
No,
chooses.
and I completely agree. And the way I look at this being a mechanic where, you know, I have a customer come in and he's a father of 4 kids and has 0 money, and I give him a bill for $1,000. And on my end, I think, well, he just needs to fix his car, but on his end, he's got the water heater that exploded and the kid might have a medical bill, and you have to prioritize what's there. And when there isn't enough money, some people maybe have the ability to get a second job. Municipal government can't get a second job, unfortunately. That goes to the taxpayers of, like you said, what do you want the community to look like? Where are you going to cut corners? And I think at this stage of the game, where the cutting of the corners would be heavily on the education side, I think this community needs to think seriously about where we're going to go and what direction. So with that being said, I'll make a motion to put the pyramid override on the ballot.
And I'll second that motion.
Our recommendation is June 15th.
Special election.
Special election
Call.
on June 15th. It's a 35-day requirement, notice requirement to the town clerk. So that's our recommendation. And then at the meeting, town meeting, annual town meeting, we will go through the special town meeting warrant on Monday evening, May 11th, and we will dissolve that meeting. And then we will open the annual town meeting and go through non-money and maybe some money articles also. But our recommendation is to hold the budgets off until June 22nd.
So
The week after
Courtney, would you
the
amend my
override.
motion to have it put on the ballot for June 15th?
Yep.
Thank you.
So you're going, you would have a motion to call for special election to place the.
Oh,
the
sorry. So
attached-
make a motion to call for special
Special
election to
election on-
place the pyramid override to a ballot vote on June 15th.
June 15th.
And a second.
I'll second.
Do we want to read this?
I think
As
you,
it reads.
I think it would make sense to read the 2 questions into the record,
Okay, the
Mr.
2
Chairman.
questions as it would read would be as follows. Shall the town of Webster be allowed to assess an additional $2 million in real estate and personal property taxes for purposes of funding the operating budgets of the town and public schools for fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2015? Also, shall the town of Webster be allowed to assess an additional $1 million in real estate and personal property taxes for the purposes of funding the operating budgets of the town and the public schools for fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2015? Any other discussion from the board? Poll board?
Selectman Becker?
Yes.
Selectman Starzak?
Yes.
Selectman Jolda?
Yes.
Selectman Board?
Yes. Anything else? Any other business unknown at the time of posting? The fiscal year 2016 utility rate presentation has been postponed till next week.
Monday evening at 5:30.
Right. Any other business at unknown at time of posting?
Make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to adjourn. Any other discussion? Twenty poll board?
Selectman Becker?
Yes.
Selectman Starzak?
Yes.
Selectman Jolda?
Yes.
Selectman Board?
Yes. Thank you.
It's a very good